The Buddha has just passed away into nirvana, and the historical stakes, they are unimaginably high right now. According to the ancient records in the great treatise on the perfection of wisdom, the physical world is reacting in absolute chaos. We're talking earthquakes shattering the ground, rivers literally flowing backward, and meteors streaking across the daytime sky. But there's a much bigger crisis happening behind the scenes. The enlightened disciples, the arhats, are actually choosing to pass away into nirvana as well, following their master. So, the very survival of Buddha's teachings is hanging by a thread. This explainer takes us directly into the heart of the First Council, where the fate of Buddhism was decided not just by these massive cosmic events, but by one deeply flawed, intensely human disciple.
Now, to really grasp this, we need to understand the sheer dramatic irony of Venerable Ananda. Just imagine this for a second. You dedicate your entire life serving your master day and night for 25 years as his personal attendant. You actually have a photographic memory. You've memorized every single word, every single discourse the Buddha ever gave. And yet, when the time comes to compile those exact teachings so they aren't lost to history, you find yourself physically locked out of the assembly. Why? Well, because you are the only one left who is still completely human.
And this perfectly captures the cosmic panic happening at this exact moment. The heavenly deities rush down to Mahakāshyapa, who is the senior-most surviving disciple. They're practically begging him to act, crying out that the Dharma ship is breaking, the Dharma city is crumbling, the Dharma sea is drying up. You see, as more and more arhats entered nirvana, the deities realized that the light of wisdom was rapidly extinguishing from the world. The Dharma, the core teachings, were in real danger of being lost forever. So, Mahakāshyapa hears these pleas and makes a firm resolve to compile the teachings before it's too late.
To pull off this monumental task, Mahakāshyapa selects exactly 1,000 elite arhats to gather at Vulture's Peak in Rajagraha. Now, what's really fascinating here is the sheer practicality behind that specific number. Why not more, right? Well, the local ruler, King Ajatasattu, had generously agreed to provide daily food and provisions for the assembly so they wouldn't have to waste precious time begging for alms. But he could only support exactly 1,000 monks. That's it. There was absolutely no room for dead weight. Every single seat was critical.
Which brings us to a moment of incredible, palpable tension. Out of the 1,000 monks sitting in that assembly, 999 are fully enlightened arhats. They've severed all worldly attachments, they are perfectly pure, entirely devoid of defilements. But there's one empty seat, and there's one flawed attendant standing out like a sore thumb. Ananda. Because he loved the Buddha so deeply, Ananda is just drowning in a sea of earthly grief. He remembers the teachings perfectly, sure, but he is still heavily bound by his emotions.
Part 1. The Rejection of Ananda, a Public Trial.
So, Mahakāshyapa, acting as the leader, scans the room using his divine eye, and he immediately zeroes in on Ananda's impurity. In a shocking, highly dramatic move, Mahakāshyapa physically grabs Ananda by the hand and pulls him right out of the assembly, in front of all 999 enlightened masters. It's a brutal, completely public rejection. Mahakāshyapa tells him point blank, "We are compiling the Dharma in a pure assembly. Your defilements are not exhausted. You cannot stay here." And he doesn't stop there. He launches into this devastating list of specific accusations, historically known as the Dukkhata faults. He blames Ananda for persuading the Buddha to allow women to ordain, which Mahakāshyapa claims weakened the Dharma. He accuses him of failing to give the Buddha water when his back ached. Ananda tries to argue that 500 carts had just crossed the river, making it totally muddy, but Kāshyapa just retorts that the Buddha could have purified it. He accuses Ananda of accidentally stepping on the Buddha's robe. Ananda says a sudden gust of wind blew it under his feet. And then, the absolute heaviest blow. Mahakāshyapa blames Ananda for failing to ask the Buddha to extend his life for an eon, directly hastening his death.
The contrast here is just heartbreaking. We have Ananda desperately trying to explain that his mistakes were born of circumstance, or, as he puts it, blinded by a demon, and that contrasts sharply with Kāsyapa's totally unyielding judgment. But then Ananda realizes something crucial. Making excuses isn't the point. In a profound act of humility, he completely drops his ego. He removes his sandals, kneels before the entire assembly, and repents for every single fault. Kāshyapa looks at him, tells him to return only when he is completely free of his earthly tethers, and literally shuts the heavy doors of the assembly hall on him.
Part 2. The Dark Night of the Soul, the Push for Enlightenment.
So now Ananda is locked out, utterly alone in the night, and the pressure on him is almost unimaginable. The entire survival of the Buddha's words, the very words that are supposed to guide generations for thousands of years, relies entirely on Ananda getting enlightened tonight. He has to force a spiritual breakthrough before the sun rises, where the first council will fail. Throughout the evening, he paces and meditates with frantic, desperate intensity. But here's the catch. The texts note that Ananda had immense wisdom, for sure, but he actually lacked deep concentration. By pushing so incredibly hard, he created an imbalance. By midnight, he's just overwhelmed with physical exhaustion and deep despair. Finally, in the pre-dawn hours, he simply gives up the struggle. He stops trying to force it. As he leans back to rest his exhausted body, right in that exact microsecond, after his feet leave the floor but before his head even hits the pillow, boom! He lets go of everything, and a lightning-fast, diamond-like enlightenment strikes him.
It's an unbelievable transformation. Just a few hours prior, he was a grieving attendant, heavily bound by love and earthly ties. And now, he is a fully realized arhat, completely unattached. What's truly fascinating to realize here is that Mahakasyapa wasn't actually being cruel earlier. That harsh, public humiliation was actually a profound act of compassion. Kashyapa knew Ananda. He knew Ananda needed his ego shattered and his back pushed firmly against the wall to make this ultimate spiritual leap.
Instantly, Ananda rushes back to the assembly doors in the middle of the night and knocks. Kashyapa calls out, "Who is it?" Ananda replies, "It's me. I have exhausted on my defilements." But Kashyapa isn't just going to take his word for it, right? He decides to test Ananda's newly acquired supernatural mastery. He refuses to open the door and commands, "If you are truly an arhat, come through the keyhole." And, using his new spiritual power, Ananda phases right through the locked door and appears directly before the assembly. Part 3. The compilation of the sutras. The lion's seat.
Inside the hall, the atmosphere completely shifts. Kashyapa gently pats Ananda on the head, validating his incredible achievement, and then invites him to take the absolute most prestigious spot in the room, the lion's seat. The man who was literally cast out into the dirt just hours before is now elevated above the entire assembly, tasked with speaking the words of the Buddha. Sitting there, Ananda faces the direction of the Buddha's passing, brings his hands together, and speaks the words that will forever become the opening to nearly every Buddhist sutra ever written. "Thus have I heard," at one time. In those few words, Ananda humbly bridges the massive gap between eternal truth and human experience. He isn't claiming to be the Buddha, he is acting as the perfect, unblemished vessel for the Buddhist teachings.
The reaction from those 999 arahats is completely visceral. Upon hearing Ananda's voice seamlessly echo the Buddha's exact cadence, they are struck with such shock and awe that many of them literally levitate into the air. The texts actually say they floated up to the height of 7 palm trees. They wept, not with earthly grief, but with a profound, piercing realization of impermanence. Seeing Ananda sit there and speak the words made them realize the physical Buddha was truly gone. His magnificent form had faded, leaving behind only his name and these faithfully recited teachings. Because of Ananda's massive breakthrough, the First Council is a resounding, historic success. Together, they systematically compiled the 3 baskets of Buddhism, the Tripitaka. Step 1. Ananda successfully recites all the sutras, which are the discourses. Step 2. Venerable Upali steps up to recite the Vinaya, the monastic rules. And Step 3, the Abhidharma, the deeper philosophical and psychological frameworks, is formally codified. Together, this monumental undertaking secures the Dharma, guaranteeing that the light of wisdom wouldn't be extinguished but perfectly preserved for countless future generations.
As we wrap up this explainer, I really want you to reflect on Ananda's incredible journey. Think about it. He had all the knowledge in the world, but it was his attachment, his ego, and his grief that held him back from his ultimate potential. It took hitting total rock bottom, completely letting go of the struggle, and breaking his own pride to finally find true clarity. So what earthly attachments are you clinging to right now? What mental roadblocks do you need to just let go of so you can finally pass through your own locked doors? Let that sit with you for a bit. Keep learning, keep questioning, and we'll see you in the next one.